The rise of anti Semitism, or more specifically, hatred of the Hebrew people, has been justified by organizations and individuals alike by using Israel's response to Hamas's latest terrorist attack on their borders. Things from attributing motives based on ethnicity to unapologetic calls for the extermination of the Jews, we need to understand what are the actual facts on the table before coming to conclusions. If Israel were targeting civilians alongside military targets, it would be inexcusable. If Israel had not taken steps to make peace with the government organization in charge of Gaza, then they could be classified as an aggressor. If the Gazan people were being kept from living better lives solely due to the actions of Israel, then they could be empathized with. The problem is that we at Calvary Christian Fellowship do not believe that any of this is true. In this video, we will continue our Why We Stand with Israel series, clarifying the following. First, that in this conflict, but in the conflicts going forward as well, Israel did not fire the first shot. That defending your borders against an aggressor and responding accordingly is not unjust. Second, that Hamas is not being held accountable for doing the things Israel is being accused of. And if it's a crime, then every perpetrator of those actions needs to be condemned. And third, Israel has publicly stated and demonstrated a desire to minimize civilian casualties. Hamas has publicly stated and demonstrated an ongoing desire to maximize the casualties of their own citizens. The fact that these need to be condemned like with like is imperative, and our goal here is consistency. So starting with that first fact, the conflict in Gaza began with the actions of Hamas, not Israel. On October 7, 2023, Hamas agents used hang gliders to cross over the Israeli border and murdered hundreds of people at a music festival. These Hamas agents then recorded themselves with body cams and GoPro cameras using guns, farming equipment, and other weapons to attack nearby civilian centers known as kibbutzes. The total loss of life resulted in the largest organized killing of Hebrew people since the Holocaust. And some of the crimes reported included, but weren't limited to, forcing parents watch as their baby was roasted alive, the beheading of babies with blood still on their car seats and carriages, and the mass rape and mutilation of women both before and after they were killed. Despite the horror of these actions straight out of the Quran and Sunnah, Hamas leadership dubbed the act the Al-Aqsa Flood, after the mosque constructed over the Temple Mount to celebrate their conquest and colonization of Jerusalem in the 8th century AD. In response, Israel has publicly declared war on Hamas. Calls for ceasefire have been accepted and subsequently violated by Hamas multiple times before the Israeli government stopped offering. Command centers built in hospitals, schools, and near churches have been destroyed. Terror tunnels have been flooded. Israel has also cut off their provision of free water and electricity they had been providing to Gaza, in spite of the fact they have openly declared their hostility towards Israel and regularly launched missiles into civilian areas on a regular basis. As of this recording, the conflict is still ongoing due to the harsh realities of urban warfare against a completely hostile population. This is what brings us to the second fact. Hamas is committing the crimes Israel is accused of. Only Israel is condemned for what Hamas has actually done, and Israel has not, in fact, verifiably declared or committed these acts. So, if Israel is to be condemned for actions that Hamas has committed, then both need to be condemned. If Israel is being falsely accused of the actions that Hamas committed, Hamas still needs to be condemned. 5 examples that we'll provide in the length of this video will be that first, Hamas beheaded and burned babies alive. Israel is being accused of purposely dismembering children. The reality is that the Israeli government discovers Hamas military centers and apartment complexes and gives the civilians inside a warning to vacate the building. When their own government has fired missiles at vans trying to flee and ordering them, that is, the Gazan citizens in these apartment complexes, to remain in those buildings, children have been dismembered. As a consequence of having a missile launched at the building they were forced inside of by Hamas using human shield tactics. The second act that is, of course, leveled at Israel, but is actually true of Hamas, is that Hamas publicly paraded many of their rape victims with blood still on their crotches, both before and after their deaths, being cheered on by their citizens. Israel is being accused of raping women captives in private. While individual examples of a soldier acting on their own are possible, they have and will continue to be condemned and put into prison. Hamas is following a political and religious institution that considers rape, murder, and anything that strikes terror into the hearts of the unbelievers as virtues due to the fact that Muhammad practiced them and is considered their perfect example in Surah 33 of the Quran. Third, Hamas members celebrated the fact they had murdered Hebrews with their own hands to their families using phones that they stole from the bodies. Israel is accused of desiring to exterminate the Arabs, Syrians, Jordanians, and Lebanese. Not only has the Israeli government explicitly stated that the only ones they're interested in wiping out is Hamas, the reasons for that declaration of war is because of the actions of that organization, not their ethnicity or their nationality. If they were accurate that Israel desired, motive, the extermination of Arabs, they wouldn't have members in their own military, police force, and government who are from these very same backgrounds. Fourth, Hamas has repeatedly violated the terms of the ceasefires they've requested from Israel. Israel is being accused of cruelty for refusing to offer further ceasefires to Hamas immediately after they commit terrorist attacks. Hamas has taken hostages in terrorist attacks for leverage against Israel to release convicted terrorists in their prisons. Israel is accused of taking hostages from Hamas for the same reason. The reality is that these men are in prison for attempted murder, rape, and failing to act out the same things Hamas saw through in the operation they took full responsibility for in the operation known as Al-Aqsa Flood. This will bring us to our third fact for the evening. Israel has attempted to minimize civilian casualties. Hamas has made efforts to maximize them. At the time of this recording, the tactics of Hamas have always been to store weapons and personnel in civilian locations, which is a war crime. Examples would be hospitals, schools, and apartments. When Israel discovers weapons being illegally stored in places where their destruction would also result in the loss of innocent lives, that is what is meant by human shield tactics. Israel provides the people of Gaza with free water and electricity, and therefore also has access to their phones to warn them of oncoming missile strikes. Those that attempted to flee were gunned down by Hamas themselves. Those who remain are celebrated as martyrs in accordance with Islamic tradition. An example of this in action is reported by the notoriously liberal Yahoo News site. Quote, over the weekend, Canaan's mother received a recorded call on her cell phone from the Israeli military. When she heard who was calling, she hung up. Minutes later, the same call came to the landline in her apartment, warning her to leave if she was storing weapons in an apartment building across the street from Canaan and her family, where they live 4 brothers who are Hamas militants. Israeli intelligence called the Hamas members to warn them that they were targets. Canaan said leaders at the local mosque urged neighbors to converge on the apartment building and act as human shields. She added, no one heeded the call. However, so the Hamas militants fled. This is from the McClatchy newspapers, posted on December 29th, 2008. This is not a new phenomenon. It's also worth noting that at the time of this recording, Israel has maintained a 2-to-1 civilian to terrorist casualty count in this war. Given the best efforts of Hamas to make this worse for the purpose of propaganda, the sole purpose of the Palestinian people, Israel has miraculously managed to see this through in ways that no other war in history has ever seen. For a point of comparison, the civilian to military death rate in World War II on both sides of the Axis and Allies was 2.2 to 1. That includes the deaths of the Holocaust, the Royal Air Force's fire bombings, and both nuclear weapons being dropped on Japan. The reason the ratio is so close with those kind of numbers is because the military deaths were just that high. As millions of soldiers died, over double that were dying on and off the battlefield as well. This is the nature of war. As Israel is seeking to prevent a government organization from ever committing what took place on October 7th again, and hopefully taking into consideration the 14 centuries that came before it, we are unfamiliar, this generation at least, of the kind of evil that can't be reasoned with. There is such a thing as just war theory. We don't claim that Israel is perfect, nor should we expect them to be until their Messiah returns. Until then, recognize that the very things being accused of Israel, and rightly recognized as evil if they were true, are actually true of Hamas and why they are being fought. This is why we stand with Israel in this conflict. However, we don't want to end the topic here. Our series will continue with a brief history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as well as their relations with one another, and hopefully be informative to you as well. I encourage you to look up the events, the occurrences, and of course to give citation for the topics mentioned in this video that haven't been already. I thank you for your time and look forward to you joining us in the next study. Until then, pray for the peace of Jerusalem.